Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Jordan Lee Dooley. Jordan is the author of a book called Own Your Everyday. She runs a company called Jordan Lee Media. Her mission is to help women prioritize their health and well-being as they build their dreams. She's got a brand new book. By the time you're seeing this or listening to this, it's probably out. I think this episode is dropping the day after her book comes out. So check it out. It's called Embrace Your Almost. Comes out on April 5th. I'm sure we'll be talking about that a little bit. A few things we'll be talking about today. So she's got a book that's done really well, has a ton of reviews. Behind the scenes on this next book. Can you learn from Etsy to sell more books on Amazon, Instagram? There's a lot of things that we can unpack here. I think you're going to love this episode. So Jordan, welcome. Great to have you.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks for having me. What an intro.
So let's take it back to the first book. So you released Own Your Everyday. It looks like back in May of 2019, 3 days before my birthday.
Oh, wow.
Why'd you write the first book? What sparked that?
That's a good question. You know, I wrote the first book because, well, it was interesting how it kind of evolved, but I really wrote it because I felt like the number one question I was getting asked because, well, at that time I was speaking on college campuses a lot. I was speaking at women's events a lot. And it felt like the number one question I was getting asked was like, how do I figure out what I want to do with my life? Like, how did you figure out what you want to do? How do I figure out what I was made to do? Like that sense of searching for meaning and a sense of purpose. And so what's interesting is I think a lot of us get caught up in and also what looks good, what's impressive. And so that book was about overcoming the pressure to prove so you can really do what you were made to do. And so it's really about trying things, finding what you love, but a lot of times that's through action and through trying things. And so that's kind of the message of that book is how do you really overcome the pressure to prove so you can really walk in the things that you were made to do. So yeah, that was why I wrote it. And it was really fun to launch it into the world and see how many lives it touched. And it was awesome.
Yeah. And so it sounds like you're traveling, speaking, you're getting a similar question often. Mm-hmm. And so you say, hey, I want to write a book on this specific thing. How did you see that fitting in with, so if that's the purpose for the reader, what was the purpose for you as the author? Like, how did you see that fitting in with your business, your ecosystem?
I feel like a lot of my business grew because I was naturally a storyteller. Like I started with Etsy and I was doing like handmade products, hand lettered stuff. I was a college student and then graduated and realized I need to make some more money. So I added wedding photography. And so I just kind of had this like hodgepodge of like a creative freelance business for a year or two. And in that time, it really like my social media started to grow. Like I started to get all these opportunities and I'm like, why is it growing? And I realized it was because I wasn't just sharing cute pictures of couples that I was taking at weddings or because I was sharing a picture of my product. It was because I would write these long captions, which now I've turned it into like carousel style posts and, different formats. But I was writing these long captions about relevant topics to a young woman's life who was my core demographic at that point. And they were getting shared like crazy. I mean, it was like 30,000 shares on Facebook, 10,000. I mean, it was just like, and I was starting to grow this community and I was like, I feel like I need a resource and a tool to where they can have these like captions, but extended and longer and more in depth in their hand. And so it served that purpose, but it also was like kind of an authority builder for me, if you will, because it was like, it took it from Etsy shop owner, Instagram influencer, to like author. And I felt like that was a tool I could use for my brand. And it really did open a lot of doors that I didn't expect, even just change the way I was like opportunities that came and different things like that. So it was partly to meet that need of, hey, I want to give you a resource that takes a lot of what you love to consume just from my businesses and what's really actually allowed my business to grow, which really was my words and my storytelling, and kind of build that into something bigger and more lasting than like an Instagram caption.
Got it. That makes sense. So it's giving people more of what they want, which is or what they're voting with their shares and likes that they're interested in, and then also becoming an authority, which we always say the root word of authority is author. You can't spell the word authority without the word author. So can you, and I was on your website earlier, and I like how I think you do a great job of visuals and visuals and design and aesthetic. And so I like the kind of from Etsy owner to this, to, I think it was influencer podcast, book,
a lot of things.
then something else.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the exact sequence, but can you kind of unpack that? Was it sounds like it started with the Instagram, then the Etsy shop, then book, or what was that progression?
So I started with Etsy, partly just kind of as a hobby. It was like a side hustle hobby that I enjoyed doing in my free time when I was a senior in college. And then I realized like, oh, this was like 2015, 2016 time. And I was like, oh, I could use Instagram and Facebook, which at the time it was actually more Facebook, but I was like, I could use these platforms to try to sell more products. And so that's where I kind of hopped onto Instagram, did a few giveaways with interior designers with my product, et cetera. I started to grow, did a lot of writing that got tons of shares. And so then I had this larger audience, and a lot of them were like women and young girls, I'd say 18 to 25 at that time. And so anyway, that led to adding wedding photography. So because a lot of them were getting married and getting engaged. And so it's just kind of a natural thing to add in. And so I started doing that on top of the Etsy, but I was still writing a lot. Like writing was kind of the core thing. And then started to get asked, I graduated, got married a few months later, so really started to get asked to speak a lot on sorority groups and teams and just a lot of young women's groups, sometimes church conferences, things like that. And so actually I had pitched a book idea really soon after I graduated. I had an agent reach out to me because my account was growing. I was sharing a lot of this stuff. And she said, hey, I think you can write a book. And at the time I'm like 22, barely. And I'm like, I can. Like, what would I write a book about? And so we tried to come up with some ideas. We put a proposal out there, which I was like, what in the heck am I even doing? Said no. Everyone said no. Everyone's like, there's no idea here. Like there's no like hook. And I even, it was terrible. It was terrible. So I was like, yeah, that's okay. Like, honestly, I don't think this is the season I'm going to write a book. I need to like grow a little, maybe I need to refine my message. So anyways, we kind of tabled the whole thing. And then about a year to a year and a half later, after I had been speaking for a while, I had an editor from Penguin Random House reach out. And that's when they were like, hey, we'd love to write a book. We'd love to explore some concepts with you. And by that point, I had spent 12 to 15 months doing a lot more speaking, getting a lot more feedback, hearing this question come up and again and again. And so I had a clearer idea and concept. And so that's what led to then kind of working on the book idea. And then while I was writing that book is when I launched the podcast. And so we launched the podcast in October of 2018. And that hit number 2 on the top charts, like above Joe Rogan. I was like, what is happening? Like it was wild, but we launched the podcast like we launch a book. So we had a podcast launch team, like we had all these, it was really fun. I totally, so it kind of gave me a practice run on when I would launch the book later the next year. So then we launched the book the following year in May of 2019, and podcast continued to grow, continued to do that. And then the following fall, so October, November of 2019 is when I rolled out my education coaching brand, where I have a couple courses in a coaching program, just to kind of support. It's called Own It Academy. So Own Your Everyday, Own It Academy, to kind of expand on helping you step into what you were called to do. So that's kind of the evolution of everything. And we've just kind of been stewarding and building that since.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It was a hot mess for the first few years.
Well, hey, I mean, you're throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think it's just very smart. It's a smart way to do it. One of our core values at self-publishing school is fail fast, fail forward, fail often. And so it's like, how do we fail quickly and learn and iterate and get feedback? Yeah. Which I think it just so happened that, a lot of the iterations you were doing were actually doing pretty well. Yeah. Which is cool. So is Instagram, is that kind of the hub that feeds, like the top of funnel hub that kind of feeds into everything else that you do? Is that
That's
now
the
podcasts kind of usurp that? Like what do you view as the hub that brings in the ecosystem? Because you get, just from the outside looking in, it's like, okay, this is a pretty sizable ecosystem that's building.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to bringing new people in, especially organically, Instagram is probably my primary way of doing that. But the podcast is probably second runner up to that, if we're not talking about paid ads and other things like that, only because the podcast gets shared with friends, because we've really turned that into like a lot of wellness stuff, wellness as in the context of working and, the busyness of life and all of that, just because that's a big part of my story the last few years. So it's evolved into that, but it's really like the ultimate podcast for women. Like, what do you need to know? But anyway, I would say Instagram, partly because of the really shareable content I create with, I mean, I'll post a carousel and it'll have 4, 5, 10, 14,000 shares. So I tried to kind of take what I used to do with long captions and turn it into a format that's serving, our modern world a little bit more. So that brings in a ton of new people all the time. And then the podcast would be probably second runner up to that.
Got it. And why do you think your Instagram's grown so quickly? And in any big picture things that you've learned that might be helpful for other people who are looking to grow specifically on Instagram?
It's a good question. I think it grew originally because I was very specific to who I was speaking to. I really pretty much spoke to on a couple of core topics that were kind of creating a soul tie, and I didn't even realize that. And soul tie is like this sense of like, you get me, you understand my problem, you understand my frustration. So when I was first starting, and where a lot of what I was building, you remember I was doing wedding photography, and I was creating a lot of like wedding signage and like hand lettered type stuff on Etsy. So a lot of what I was doing was around like the topic of faith and relationships, and it was very targeted toward like college women and recent graduates. So I had a very specific demographic and a very specific like couple of topics or topic that I spoke to. And so that was first. Then I would say I've been able to go broader now. Like now I weave in some wellness conversation. I've got more of like a work/business education arm with the academy. But I think what's allowed me to continue growing, and there's been times I've plateaued for sure. Like once you kind of get to a certain spot, sometimes my growth, I just kind of say, I don't really care to grow right now. I'm not going to kill myself over it. But the way I know I can continue growing whenever I want to plug and play that is to be very consistent with super shareable content. And I think everyone's talking about how like reels on Instagram are like all the rage right now. And to a degree they are. That is what Instagram wants to push. That's what they will reward. But what's been interesting to evaluate is I've been doing a lot of testing, and I find that I get a lot more, I feel like reels can lead to some growth, but really it's more reach, and carousels and really shareable carousels are leading to a lot more growth. Like I can look at my follows on a reel that'll get 500,000 views or 300,000 views, and I might get a couple hundred follows or a couple dozen follows, but on a carousel, I'll get sometimes like 4,000 new followers from one carousel. So I think utilizing that format of what's something that are just like shareable bits that people just want to easily put on their story. I think that is key, regardless of what your niche is and regardless of what topic you talk about. Consistently posting that multiple times throughout the week can make, I mean, that's what I've relied on for growth now, because I can see the difference between Instagram in 2022 and Instagram in 2016, 2017. Like I was growing no problem, just posting whatever about my niche. Now it's like I have to be a lot more strategic with the type of content that I post.
It's more competitive. I mean, similar to books as well on Amazon, the ecosystem, the market sophistication is going up. That's really interesting. I love that. I love the distinction you made between reach and growth. And now I'm going to ask this hopefully for the audience, but maybe it's just for me. Because I'm the no Instagram guy. And so I don't even have an Instagram. All I've got is Facebook. You'll get a kick of this. I did my first Instagram live last night.
That's awesome. Congrats.
But I was on someone else's, and so it was just that was the kind of like you. It's like they had a big Instagram following. It's like, hey, let's bring you in to talk about book stuff. It's like, all right. So I'm like trying to figure out how to even get on this thing right before it happens. But so. For those who aren't familiar, carousel, what is it? And how do you design a shareable carousel?
That's a great question. Okay, so a carousel is, think of like a picture on Instagram, but instead of just posting one, Instagram allows you to post up to 10. So it's essentially slides, and they're usually like quick bits of information or a quick piece of content. So a lot of times what I've seen to be really effective is when you almost treat it like a mini book or a mini article, and you make a cover image. So you can do any kind of cover image. It can just be like a styled image. It doesn't have to be a person. It can be you if you're kind of the face of your brand. You can do it various ways. But then you put a title on it. The title needs to be intriguing. So it might be something like 3 reasons why you're not growing on Instagram, or it could just be like, it could be a statement that's kind of like, it could be something like, if you're struggling with X, read this. So it's kind of a clear like call to action. Or it might be something that's more of a statement, like it's not your job to, and then something that you kind of would assume it's your job. It's not your job to make everyone happy. Okay. So it just depends on what your niche is. But my point is something that kind of creates a little curiosity. So you put that in like bold text over the photo, and then you swipe through, and you can do either like quotes on like a Canva. You can use Canva to just put some quotes on a plain colored background. Or what I do is I actually use a tweet template, so it looks like a tweet. And as you scroll through the 5, 10, however many slides that I've got, it's expanding on an idea. And then each one, or at least a couple of them, you want to be like a statement or a really interesting fact that people are like, oh my gosh, my friends need to hear this, or my friends need to know this, right? So whether it's a stat that like is kind of mind blowing about your topic of interest, or is a piece of encouragement that's like, oh, I needed to hear that when I'm struggling with my Instagram growth or my weight or whatever it is you help people with. Something that makes them go, I want my friends to hear this. This really helps me. They will just say, post a story. So it's essentially several slides, and it's kind of building an idea, almost like a mini article, but everything should be 1 to 2 sentences on each slide. You don't want like a full book on every slide.
And is the last slide usually some sort of call to action?
Yeah, a lot of times. So what I've started doing, especially with this book, which I didn't do with the last book, because I don't think carousels were even a feature on Instagram the last time. So what I've been doing with this book is from this book is about like waiting seasons, not being where you want to be, kind of feeling stuck in life. So what I've been doing is I'll do a carousel, and the cover will say, if you're in a waiting season, read this. And then there's like 5 or 6 really encouraging or like informative tweets.
Cool.
And then at the end, it's a picture of the book, and it's like pre-order here or something like that. So
yeah. Hey, Chandler Bolt here. I hope you're loving this episode so far. It's time to go from inspiration to implementation. All right, so if you've learned something, we want to help you implement what you've learned with your book. So what I want you to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a publishing consultation with one of the experts on my team. We'll talk about your goals for your book, your dreams, your challenges, your next steps, and we'll start putting together a plan. All right, so go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a call with the team. Let's see how we can help with your book. It's time to implement. And I think one thing you're touching on, I talk about this in my new book. It's there's 2 applications: is the 4 P's of a high converting offer and the 4 P's of a best-selling book. And it's person, pain, promise, price. And I think that's exactly what I know the person that I'm talking to. I know the pain that they have, that they know that they have. And then I am meeting them with a promise that's inspiration, and that's encouragement, and that's that sort of thing, which I think it's an easy thing to overlook and jump to the, how are you doing the carousel? And what are you doing this? But that's one singular decision. I feel like just looking at what you've done, 100%. That it feels like making that singular decision has made everything else
pretty
just
easy,
massively more effective.
Yeah, and effective too. And I mean, you're right, because I think a lot of times and I think the other thing to remember, especially if you are an expert on something, like maybe your expertise is nutrition or your expertise is finances or something, it's so easy to want to do all education on Instagram, which is great. Like, I think a large part of your content can be educational, but I think what really gets the growth is the stuff that's like kind of like stops me in my tracks, not just because I learned something, but because, wow, this like really touched me or challenged me or uplifted me. And I want other people in my industry or who are struggling with their weight or with their money or whatever to hear this. Like even if you would do a whole educational story slide, but at the end you say like, remember, your worth is not in how many, is not in your your worth is not in your net worth, right? Or something like that. Like a simple little like quote like that, people could be like, oh God, I needed to hear that. And they might reshare it. Yeah. So you can slip in those reminders that are punchy, that are short, that are quick, and that are memorable. And that makes it really easy for growth, because people will share that even if they don't follow you. And then it just becomes this like exponential thing.
Yeah. So you spoke about this with the carousel specific to the new book. And okay, it's waiting seasons. Okay, that's the topic of the carousel. And then maybe it's a call to action at the final book. Anything else that you've seen work well, or that you've done specifically around the book launches to use Instagram to move copies of the book?
That's a really good question. So one thing that happened with the first book launch, and we're going to see kind of how this plays out with the next one, obviously. But one thing that happened is we had a couple, I noticed really obviously using user-generated content is awesome, but we almost kind of turned it into somewhat of a competition. And now it depends on whether you're self-published or traditionally published and where your book is sold. But one thing we saw was it was like the first day or 2 that the book was out, and we noticed that somebody posted like, my Target sold out of, like, they posted a picture of like the empty shelf. And so I was like, so I reposted it and said, oh my gosh, you guys are starting to sell out Target. So then it was like, it almost created this like, I want to go see if my Target has it. So we sold out Targets like all over the place. It was wild, but it was started with one and then two, and then like, oh, another Target sold out, another, and it created this like intrigue or like curiosity of like, I wonder if my Target has it. So kind of, I don't want to say like using FOMO, but kind of using this like, are you going to get a copy at Target kind of thing is really powerful. One of the things that I think we're going to do this time around that I've done with other offers that I've made outside of books is a sticky note wall. Have you guys ever done that?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so when we've had people enrolled, like my coaching program, which is literally like, let's figure out what you're good at and what you want to do and make a plan to start making that happen. That's what my coaching program is all about. When people enroll in that or my other courses, we do like a 1 week cart open and we start putting names on a wall of people who have actually enrolled.
Cool.
And so we have filled up an entire wall from top to bottom of names. And it's so funny because now like when I'm actually coaching live, I'll see in the chat, like, yep, your sticker wall sold me. Like I wasn't going to do it, but I wanted my name on the wall. Like it's wild. And so I'm like, why would I not do that for books? Because it's a way to, it's completely in integrity. All it is doing is acknowledging those who have raised their hand and said yes to whatever it is you're putting in front of them. And it shows this community and this like movement around whatever it is you've created. And I really believe in the importance of positioning a book, not as a message, but as a movement, because your message, even if it's educational, is about helping people move the needle in their life towards something that they want to get to, whether that's being more content or getting healthier or selling more books or whatever outcome you're trying to get them. And so I've really tried to always position in the things that do well is like, hey, you want to be part of this movement? Do you want to help like make a difference in people's lives by getting this in the hands of more women or more people who are struggling with this or more authors or what have you? And so really positioning it that way and creating that like sense of community where it's like, hey, I'm acknowledging that you pre-ordered this. Like I'm sticking your name on the wall. Like that's going to be a little challenging for me in terms of they're ordering from all these retailers. So it's going to be more based off of when they tell me they ordered versus when you're self-published, you may have more access to that direct data, but using that kind of resource in one way or another, both the user generated content and the acknowledgement, putting this like wall of fame, if you will, of everyone who said yes and like been a part of this movement and signed up for the movement, it creates like such a sense of community and buy-in in a way that I've seen very few other things do. So that's a huge thing we're going to probably try to do this time.
That's awesome. That's smart. I want to back up to your first book a little bit, and then I want to talk about the next book. I mean, you've already kind of talked about it some of just like, hey, here's what we're doing, here's what we're trying, all that. With the first book, were there any other like top 2 or 3 things that sold the most copies of the book?
I would say a huge thing that I went against the advice I was given. I was told, don't send it to fashion bloggers, don't send it to like mommy bloggers, like people in their audience don't buy books, send it to authors, send it to thought leaders, whatever. And I was like, I disagree. Like, I think a lot of these people are like, especially micro influencers. So what we did, instead of just doing a big influencer campaign, we sent it to people with 6,000 followers. We sent it to people with 8,000 followers. We sent it like people who had really niche specific communities for clean living or motherhood or whatever issue. But point being, like, their people showed up, and it was wild because what we did is we kind of did it in waves. So we had a list of like 300 micro influencers, and we sent like the first 100 the book like the week before launch, and so they started sharing about it during the week before. Then another wave got it during launch week, and then another wave got it like the week after launch week. So for like a month there was this like whole new wave, and there was so many people resharing it or sharing about it. But they were, I mean, I think in so many ways the micro influencer thing is actually smarter for books because people trust them so much. I mean, it can be great to get if you can land a couple big influencers, like great. But to be honest, I found even as a bigger influencer, like I found that to be more effective, because even when I share a book, people are seeing me share books all the time because half my friends are authors and I'm constantly sharing a book suggestion. So it's like, I can see why from a viewer perspective, it's like, did you actually read that? Like, are you just sharing that because it's your friend, you know, versus when like the person they follow that has 9,000 followers and talks about motherhood all the time and they feel like they're best friends with and they DM with all the time, like she shares a book recommendation, they're going to buy it. So the micro influencer thing in waves was another big thing that I think really moved the needle and that we're doing again this time.
I like that. That's really, really smart. And I like the waves piece.
Yeah. And it's an incentive for them too, because it's a cross promotion thing. Like, even if you don't have a huge audience, maybe you've got several thousand followers or whatever, but you're sending it to people of similar audience sizes, saying like, hey, if you share it on your story, I'll repost you. They get that cross promotion. They're going to be exposed to new people too. So it's worth it for them to do that.
Yeah. That's smart. How'd you get so many reviews on that book? I'm looking at, you got 1,923 as of the recording of this, so about to pass 2,000 reviews. Anything that worked well?
No idea. I honestly, I think other than the launch team, like the launch team kind of gave us our basis, like our kind of foundation. And that was one of the big things we asked of them, was to leave reviews. And we had a pretty big launch team. So that's the other thing, is like, I feel like our launch team was close to 3,000 people. So
Oh
they
my
weren't all from,
gosh.
they weren't all from the launch team the first time, but I would say at least the first 500 were.
Yeah.
But honestly, I have no idea. I didn't really have a strategy for that. It just kind of
How
happened.
3,000 person launch team, how'd you recruit that and how'd you run that?
So we had, it actually might've been more like 2,500, but it was over 2,000 for sure. So we had, let's see, we had actually hired a launch team, like manager, like someone who runs launch teams. They've launched Bob Goff's books. They've launched like other authors' books. And so I felt like, let's kind of outsource that to someone who really knows how to run a launch team and can oversee it well. We will be doing that again this time, but a big way that we recruited for that is basically every week there was a special bonus for the launch team. So it's like, we could continue this ongoing enrollment, or we could just say, hey, there's 1 week to get in the launch team and then doors are closing. So the first time we did it, the doors are closing method. We basically gave them a week to get their spot, be a part of it. Here are all the things you're going to get, or here's some fun bonuses. And there's going to be some surprises. Cause there was this sense of like, you get access to me, you get inside info. We're going to give you some behind the scenes, some extra bonuses. And so we positioned it that way. We put it out on social media, put it out on the podcast, and put it out, via email lists as well. And just kind of really, first we built up some hype for it for like 2 or 3 weeks before. We were like, hey, we're going to do this. Hey, we're going to do this. Hey, we're going to do this. And then it was like, it's open, go, you have a week. So I think kind of creating that, even like that decision time worked really well. So that's kind of how we're, I would say is a really effective way to do it. You don't need 2,000 people on a team. Even having 50 people on a team is great. But yeah, I think giving some sort of like incentive, and then sometimes a limited window can be helpful as well.
Nice. That's smart.
Mhm.
Let's look at the next book. Well, actually, I'll just make one or two quick notes that might be helpful for you. I mentioned this might be helpful for the next one. I mentioned I sent you a copy of this book. So check out when you get it. There's a chapter on getting your first or your next 100 reviews. Gosh, I'm trying to think which chapter. Oh, chapter 20. So two things that might be helpful. One is we do a review sweeper. It's just a 3 email sequence that they get starting 21 days after they downloaded anything related to the book. That says, hey, how do you like the book? Hit reply, let me know. They reply, and then someone on your team says, hey, would you mind just copying and pasting that? Like, thank you so much. Would you mind copy paste that to an Amazon review? Simple thing. And then one other thing that might be helpful I've done with this book is just a short link. So for me, it's publishedbook.com/review. Something
awesome.
simple that your team, you can say on your podcast, and it's easy, but it's like anytime you have a call to action or someone says something positive, you can say, oh, go to whatever the embraceyouralmost.com/review or whatever that link is. And that can help just kind of corral that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I will say, now that you bring that up, the only like thing I did to try to get reviews was when I would get a DM message or like a comment, and they were like, this book changed my life, blah, blah. I would be like, thank you so much. Do you mind dropping this in an Amazon review? That would really help the book. And they were always like, yes, I would love to. So that was the only thing I did, but I think having more of a system would probably be best. So yeah, that's a great idea. I love that.
Cool. Next book. We're running out of time here, and I'm realizing that I've got a bajillion questions I could keep asking you. Embrace Your Almost. It's coming out at the time of this book, and we'll do a place people can go get it right at the end. If there's just one thing you're doing differently, or that you're like, hey, we're definitely doing this round that you haven't shared yet to market that book successfully.
I'll share 2 things quickly that we're doing. The first is we're giving away the book early. We've been doing that, meaning if you pre-order, you get an advanced digital copy and you can start reading it immediately, which was something very different. It was kind of like is that a good strategy or not? But I think it's been really good. So that's been huge. And then another thing that we are doing this time is we're actually going to try ongoing enrollment for the launch team. Obviously, we're just in the beginning of that when we're recording this. So at the time it airs, we'll see how it goes. But we're going to have on like each week, there'll be a new reason to join. So if you didn't join for last week's bonus, that's fine. There's something new this week that you might like better. So we're actually going to keep the launch team open until basically 5 or 6 days before the book launches, so people can consistently be joining. So we're going to see how that goes this time, because there's still timeouts in the sense that this bonus ends on Sunday, like your last chance to enroll in time to get it. But we're going to kind of keep bringing new people in and see how that goes.
Nice. Love it. What would what would be your parting piece of advice for the Jordan of a few years ago, or the other Jordans out there that are thinking about writing their first book, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a tendency to rewrite my books 3 times. Literally, I've rewritten both of them 3 times. Partly because I think when you write books in your 20s, and you're writing kind of like more inspirational personal development books, you're also kind of like living things as you're learning from them and writing it. So it's this kind of challenge. So I would say the biggest piece of advice I have is like understand that it's okay to write slow, and for this process to not like, it's great if you can knock it out in a few months, and if that works for you, awesome. But it's also okay to like want to revise a couple of times, because I think I felt guilty for that. Like, oh gosh, I'm just like I'm not deciding, or like I'm not being final with what I'm doing. But the books have turned out so much better. Like if I would have just run with my first manuscript both times, they wouldn't have the same title. They wouldn't have the same cover. Sometimes an idea has to evolve a bit. So it's taken me, my first book took me 2 years to write. This one really over the course of the last 3 years is what's like created it. And yes, I can write books faster. Like when I'm actually writing, it really truly only takes me like 2 to 3 months to get the manuscript out. But sometimes you have to live a little bit more experience to get your ideas clear. So anyways, I guess I just say like, have grace for yourself in the process. As much as you want to get the project done, like it will be a better project if you give it the time it needs, because it's so easy to want to hurry and hustle and rush through something. And if I had done that, we would have published a book that I would have regretted publishing a year ago, because I tried to write it in the time. Like also be very aware of the season you're writing it in, because I tried to write this manuscript in a season of grief, in a season of mourning, in a season of health issues. And it was like, I almost turned it into this, like, it was the first kind of draft of it was kind of like a memoir, but like a grief memoir, and that has nothing to do with the original idea of the book. So sometimes when you're writing from a raw place, or you're just like not in a good headspace, what you want to get out isn't what's going to come through. And I would have regretted publishing that. So we pushed the whole thing back a year. So I just say like, it's okay to take your time if that's what you need given the season of your life.
Cool. That's great. Well, hey, Embrace Your Almost comes out April 5th. Jordan, where can people go to grab a copy of the book, to find out more about you, what you're up to, all that good stuff?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So you can find me at jordanleedooley.com, and you can find all the info on the book and grab a copy at jordanleedooley.com/EYA. There's a bonus or like special edition at Target where there's bonus content. It's kind of interesting, juicy stuff I haven't shared anywhere else. And then Barnes & Noble has a signed copy. So you can pre-order, or you can order now anywhere. But jordanleedooley.com/EYA is where you can find all the things.
Cool. Guys, check out the book, Embrace Your Almost. It's live. As of the time that you're seeing this interview or hearing this interview. Jordan, you're awesome. Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help the podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book, Published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps, so how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.